This is what you always do on a Sunday at 1 o'clock. Still good to be with you, but this is really great. Renee greeted us as we walked in, and she said she grew up here. She just bought her grandparents' place, and she said there is a bigger group of people here than you're probably expecting, and she's absolutely right. You all have exceeded our expectations. So grateful to you. A lot of energy, a lot of electricity, a lot of power in the people who are here right now, and that's exactly what we need. Just to put this in perspective, let me bring out some numbers, a little bit of history and a little bit of math. In 2018, when many of us together were running that race for the United States Senate, in Polk County, I got 3,850 votes. Ted Cruz got 12,800 votes, okay? That was a split. So 3,800 to 12,800. But then check these two numbers out. In 2020, arguably the most important presidential election of our lifetimes, if not in American history, in Polk County, 14,000 eligible voters did not cast a ballot. Since that election, there have been another 3,450 people who've been added to the rolls. So we have almost 18,000 voters that we can go out there and meet and welcome into this democracy and encourage them to vote in this next election. Not only does that make up for the difference we had between Ted Cruz and myself in 2018, that's more than all the ballots cast in 2018. So here's the idea. Tell me how you feel about it. In the most voter-suppressed state in the country, where they make it harder to cast a ballot than anywhere else in America, harder to register. One of the last places where you cannot register to vote online. You've got to be able to print something out on your computer and find a stamp, if you know what one of those things are, and mail that thing in, walk over to the county courthouse, register there in person, be lucky enough to encounter a volunteer deputy registrar, one of those VDRs, who is certified by the county to register you. If you can't do any of those things, you might be out of luck. And then if you've been following the news over the last year, and you see that 13% of the ballots cast in this last primary election were rejected in the state of Texas. You see videos of people waiting hours in line outside of places like TSU, Texas Southern University. 700 polling places closed in this state over the last 10 years, primarily and disproportionately in the fastest growing Black and Latino neighborhoods in the state of Texas. Those 700 plus are twice the number of the next closest state. So I'm trying to make the case, and I hope I'm being effective as I do this, that they are trying to keep us from voting in the state of Texas, and they're trying to keep some people, more than others, from ever casting that ballot. Wouldn't it be nice if when we win on the 8th of November, the margin of victory was the very people targeted for voter suppression in the first those voters is to knock on their doors. And so I'm going to ask you just at the outset, if you would, I know this is not always polite to do in a setting like this one, but if you could pull out your phone and text the word Texas to 20377. You can do this at any time during the meeting. You text Texas to 20377, and by doing so, we will sign you up to go knock on the doors of those eligible non-voting Texans who provide that margin of victory on the 8th of November. Just to cut to the quick, there is no other way that we're going to win this. We can air the most brilliant TV ads known to humankind. I can produce the slickest piece of mail that you've ever read, that you may or may not see. It might pile up on your kitchen counter along with every other piece of junk mail that you get. We can tweet some clever things on social media. I might even dance for you on TikTok. And somebody would really like that. But none of that is going to win elections. It's got to be human-to-human contact, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball. You may not remember any of those other means of campaigning, but you will never forget that person who took the time to show up at your front door and, in their own words from their own heart, describe to you why this is the most important election in Texas history. That is profound, it is powerful, and it is how we win. So thank you in advance for signing up to be one of our volunteers. Grateful to each and every single one of you. Gracias. Now, When you show up at someone's door, or maybe even when you leave this meeting today, someone is going to ask you, because they know that you saw me, what is this guy, Beto, for? 3 things that I want you to remember. Number 1, he wants the best jobs in America to be found and created right here in the state of Texas. He wants jobs that pay a living wage, jobs where women make just as much as men for providing the same service and value on the same job. He wants to make sure that these jobs have protections and they have benefits and they don't force you to work a second or a third job just to make ends meet. Take on that 3rd or 4th shift just to put food on the table or a roof over your head. Beto wants us to be able to organize, to join unions, to be electricians or steel workers or pipe fitters or plumbers, the very professions that are going to build the energy expansion in the state of Texas as we invest in more renewable resources like geothermal and hydrogen and solar and wind, the fastest growing jobs in the United States of America today. I want those jobs here in Texas. We are the energy leader for the world today, but that lead is not a given. It won't be our future or our fortune or our fate unless we decide that we are going to take the next big step and ensuring that we are training our young people for these professions of the future, and that as the renewable energy revolution takes place, that is led right here in the state of Texas. No people are better prepared for this than ours. The only thing that we lack right now is the leadership in the highest positions of power and public trust. If we also invest in places like Angelina College and the independent school district here so that you can get early college credits when you graduate from high school, so you are ready to earn a living wage at the age of 18, ready to go on and pursue more of your academic career if that is your choice. But cost is no object. We place no barrier in front of you because of your income or your zip code. You have every chance to excel and to succeed and to find that purpose and function in your life that we all crave for ourselves and our kids and our grandkids. I've got a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And my wife Amy and I tell them, listen, we do not care at all what you do over the course of your life, in your career, the passion that you pursue, as long as you are happy, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, as long as you are making this world a better place. We want you to be so excited to go into work, whatever it is that you do, that you cannot wait to get in the door. When we're creating those kinds of jobs here in the state of Texas, our quality of life improves. The burden that each of us shoulders as property taxpayers begins to decrease because everyone is able now to pull their fair and full weight. If we focus on the big things, like the quality of jobs that we're going to create and making the investments to allow them to come true, we are going to be the leading state to start a business, to hire people, to raise your family, to move back to Polk County with your young family and invest in the success of this community. So job number 1 is jobs. Job number 2 is world-class public schools. Because if we want our young people to be competitive for those living wage jobs with purpose and fulfillment, then we need to have the backs of our school teachers, our classroom instructors, our counselors, our librarians, the people who make public education possible. Now, right here in Polk County, the average educator is underpaid by about $8,000 against the average educator nationally. So just to get to par, just to get to even, and as Texans, we're nothing about just getting to average or even, we would need to pay the educators here $8,000 more annually per year. When we win this election, that's what we're going to do. That's going to be a good start. But we're going to go beyond that. We're going to make sure that those retired educators who have not received a cost of living adjustment since the year 2004 get one every single year going forward. Inflation increased in this country 8.6% over the course of this last year. And teachers in Texas who gave the best years of their lives to our community, to our kids, to our families, they got 0%. So we need to make sure that we treat those who preceded us with the dignity and respect that they have earned and that they are owed if we expect the next generation to even consider entering the profession, and then to keep them when they arrive. 50% of Texas school teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. My 11-year-old, who goes to the same great public school that I attended in El Paso, Mesita Elementary, he has had substitute teachers every single day of the school year from August all the way to where we are right now in April. And those substitutes, God bless them, doing their best, really tough work, still providing value and education in the classroom. But Henry, my son, and his classmates are not getting the consistency and the fulfillment that we're looking for from that instructor, who is in front of kids, by the way, who just endured 2 years of learning loss because of this pandemic. Kids in a state that lost more than 80,000 of our fellow Texans who may have lost a grandparent or a mom or a dad. Kids whose parents may have lost their job in the recession that followed this pandemic. And kids who may not be living in the same house they did when the pandemic started, may not be living in a house at all, may be on the streets, in a shelter, hopping from one couch to another. That teacher in that classroom, ladies and gentlemen, you know this as well as I, beyond teaching reading and writing and arithmetic, is a lifeline for that kid right now. Let's make sure that we have her back, that we listen to her and follow her guidance when she asks us to do things that make sense to all of us, like canceling the STAR test at least this year so there's no more high stakes, high pressure in the lives of our kids. Next year, replacing that test with something that is informed by the real world experience of those teachers. Something that adequately measures what those children in that classroom need and is not used as a form of punishment to withdraw resources from teachers and classrooms and schools and to punish school districts. That's the last thing that we need right now here in the state of Texas. And then lastly on this point, let's make sure that we understand why we are where we are right now in Texas and how we got here. In the 7 years Greg Abbott has been the governor of the great state of Texas, our educational attainment has been on the slide down. All of our core competitive peer states, California, Florida, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, Virginia, Illinois, all of them are improving against Texas's performance. I'll give you an example. In the average 4th grade classroom in this state, 7 out of 10 kids cannot read at grade level. Now, that's unfortunately a pretty good predictor of their ability to graduate from high school. Doesn't mean that they won't, it's just going to be a lot harder. Their ability to pursue post-secondary education at Angelina College or any institution of higher learning. It's going to make it harder for them to compete for one of those living wage jobs. They're more likely than not to be working at a minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour in the state of Texas still, or something just a little bit above that, meaning they're dependent on public assistance or they're just scraping by, if they can get by at all. And the educators here know that you're not going to fix that problem in the 4th grade, not even in the 3rd grade. You got to get to that kid when she is 3 or 4 years old. Now, some of us are lucky enough, and that's what the O'Rourke's were, to be able to afford to send our kids to preschool. Some are disadvantaged enough to qualify for programs like Head Start to send our kids to preschool. But there are millions of families across this state who are in neither of those categories, and their kids do not begin learning in a classroom till they start in kindergarten at 5 or 6 years old. So how about investing in those kids and in our future with all-day pre-K in every single zip code in the state of Texas? That would help those kids out. It would free up their parents to finish their education, to go to work. We lose $9 billion a year from parents who are unable to leave the home because they cannot afford pre-K or childcare for those kiddos. So that second point is world-class public schools. And the last and the third point, when folks ask you, what is this O'Rourke guy all about? Tell them that we want to expand Medicaid in the state of Texas so that more people can see a doctor, fill a prescription, take their child to a mental health care provider. You all probably know this. I just discovered it by looking at the statistics for Polk County. You are one of the counties in Texas that does not have a full-time psychiatrist, unless the data that I saw was wrong. 2/3 of Texas counties do not have a full-time psychiatrist. This is not just a statistic. This is not just academic. In our state, we are 50th in the nation in access to a mental health care provider. What that means is that far too many, I've met them in deep East Texas, will get arrested on purpose to be taken to the county jail to have their schizophrenia or their bipolar disorder or their clinical depression treated in the one place that it can be guaranteed. And that treatment is not as good as it would have been if you saw a therapist, of course, but that may be what you have to settle for if you're suffering is too much. It costs you, the taxpayer here, $120 a night, más o menos, to keep that person locked up. For a fraction of that expense, we can guarantee them access to quality mental health care. In fact, in Texas, the largest provider of mental health care services is our county jail system. The largest inpatient provider is the Harris County Jail in downtown Houston, Texas. What does that say about us? We're the 9th largest economy on the planet. We reside within the wealthiest, most powerful, most medically advanced country the world has ever known. It is not for lack of resources. It is lack of commitment and political will, and focusing on the culture war issues, the divisions, the things that pit us against one another, instead of the things that really help us out going forward. That is why we are going to join every one of our border states, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, 3 of them under Republican governors who signed Medicaid into law, by doing the same thing here in Texas and bringing $10 billion of your federal tax money back to this state so we can connect with care. That's a big change from where we are today. Those 3 things. This guy Beto came to town, he talked about great jobs, world-class schools, and the ability to see a doctor, or fill a prescription, or see a therapist. On that much, we can agree. There's going to be a lot of issues that even those in the room cannot agree on every single time. I've been married for 17 years. My wife Amy and I do not agree on every single issue that we talk about, right? No 2 people ever will. But we should always seek out those things where we can make some progress. I served in Congress for 6 years, every single day, in the greatest honor of my life, on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, trying to deliver service and care and fulfill our end of the bargain to those women and men who put their life on the line for this country. Now, each one of those 6 years, I was in the minority. Republicans were in the majority. And for 2 of those years, Donald J. Trump was the president of the United States. But we did not allow that to stop us. When we found that we had a crisis in mental health care access for veterans, and 22 of them were taking their own lives each day in this country, and veterans who had an other than honorable discharge were taking their own lives at an even higher rate because the status of their discharge precluded them from setting foot in a VA and seeing a provider and getting the care that they needed literally to stay alive. So I wrote a bill called the Honor Our Commitment Act, and that bill was wonderful, but it was worth all the paper it was written on and nothing more if I couldn't find some Republicans who would back it as well. And I did, but they forced me to reach some consensus conclusions, to compromise a little. I know that's a 4-letter word in American politics right now, but I also knew that was the only way we were going to be able to move forward. So Mike Kaufman, a Republican from Colorado, Beto O'Rourke, a Democrat from Texas, introduced this legislation in the House, got it passed 435-0, got it passed in the Senate as well, and then President Trump, the man with whom I agree on almost nothing, signed that bill into law and opened up mental health care access to veterans who've been denied before. That's the approach that I'm going to take as your governor. I want to work with these Republican legislators, with these Democratic legislators, with people just like yourselves who may not consider themselves Democrats or Republicans, but fiercely independent, always thinking about how we are going to move this state forward. But in order to do that, we got to get past the person who's in the highest position of public trust right now, and the deep damage that he is doing to this state through his failed leadership. Everything that he has touched over the last 7 years has failed. I talked about our school system, the slide that we've been on for 7 years. Here's something you probably have on your mind. The power grid in the energy capital of the world could not keep the lights on when the temperature dropped last February. Hundreds of our fellow Texans died, some freezing to death in their beds, as an 11-year-old child did in Conroe, some freezing to death in their trucks, as a Vietnam-era veteran did as he tried to recharge his oxygen tank. Tens of billions of dollars in economic damage as those frozen pipes warmed up and then burst. And then every single one of us now paying the Abbott tax, a $50 surcharge on our utility bills to pay back for all the damage caused and all the windfall profits made by the energy traders and pipeline CEOs who stole $11 billion from us while people were literally freezing to death in the state of Texas. We are going to get that money back when we win this election and return it to the ratepayer. But But we got to remember how Greg Abbott failed Texas. When it comes to the border, you're going to hear a lot of hoopla from this governor, a lot of scare words about people invading this country, coming to get you. You know, all that stuff that we're probably used to at this point after 4 years of Trump and 7 years of Greg Abbott. But I just want to tell you this. He has created more chaos and confusion on the border than he has clarity. He's pulled stunts and offered not a single solution to the people of Texas. Busing migrants who've already been cleared by CBP to Washington, D.C., who volunteered to get on those buses, who probably wanted to get to Virginia or Maryland anyhow at state expense, that did nothing to improve security or safety at our border. Shutting down all U.S.-Mexico trade for the better part of 2 weeks and costing the Texas economy $4.2 billion. And your grocery costs at the store going through the roof for fresh produce because it all rotted on those ports of entry and those international bridges while he was pulling that stunt. That didn't make us any safer either. And then activating involuntarily 10,000 members of the Guard. Men and women who signed up because they said, look, I've talked to them, I've listened to them. They said, I signed up after Hurricane Harvey because I saw what those guardsmen and women did for my community, literally saving the lives of people who would have drowned in these communities. Those guardsmen did what I want to be able to do, and that's why I enlisted. Or they wanted to put their lives on the line for this country when we fight wars overseas, but they did it for noble purposes. They're now ignobly being asked to sit in Humvees on the side of the road against the border at a cost of billions of dollars to us, and ignobly, the governor has been unable to pay them on time, cut their earned tuition benefits in half. 4 of them have taken their lives since this operation has started. Morale is through the floor right now. These women and men need help. They need the governor to end this involuntary activation and return them to their families, to their kids, to their communities, to their careers. What Abbott is doing to these Guard members is a shame, and we should do them right, honor their service, and only activate them when there is a true emergency. So he's failing on that. Let me just lay this last one on you. While he's trying to distract you with the boogeyman of transgender children, you know, what bathroom door are they going to go into? What team are they going to play for? What parents are abusing their children? That's the term he uses. Asking Child Protective Services to pursue the parents of transgender kids on the charge of child abuse, which, if sustained, will mean that those kids are taken from that loving mom or that loving dad and placed into foster care, along with 30,000 kids in one of the worst run foster care programs in the United States of America. In fact, last year alone, 100 children died in the care and the custody of the state of Texas. Hundreds more were found to have been trafficked while under the care of the people of Texas due to the failed leadership of Greg Abbott. The judge who's been following this, Judge Jack, has called this a situation that's gone from bad to worse. He's failed at that as well. You name it. When he touches it, we fail as a people. We're paying the price for his political ambitions, the points that he wants to score, and the stunts that he wants to pull. You deserve a governor who cares more about you and your family than anything else. And that will be my focus when we win this in November. So last thing. If you like that agenda of great jobs, world-class schools, the ability to see a doctor, if you want to get past these divisions sowed by our current governor, this polarization, this fracturing of the state of Texas along geographic lines or partisan lines or any other lines, if you want to come back together and be united again, I want you on this campaign. And you can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican, and you're welcome here if you're a Republican. You can be an independent, you can be non-aligned, you can be someone who's never voted in an election before. It doesn't matter to me, no me importa. What I want is your help to make sure that we deliver for the people of Texas. And I know that if we commit ourselves to this, we can overcome any challenge, including the sitting governor, and win this thing. Thank you all for being here today. Very grateful for your time. And looking forward to the conversation. So Cynthia Cano, who is over here to your left, She's got a microphone that she's going to wipe down with an alcohol cloth every time someone uses it, just to be extra safe. But she's going to bring it to you if you have a question, a comment, a point that you'd like to make, an idea that you'd like to raise. I want to make sure that as we come to Livingston and Polk County, we actually have a chance to listen to and learn from the people that we want to serve. So Cynthia, I see her going around to the back.
Got my first person right here.
There we go.
Okay, this is to everybody. My wife and I, we've knocked on doors in Tarrant County for that time. We walked in Austin with you and we chanted, what does democracy look like? This is what democracy looks like.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Now, you go knock on a door and you sign somebody up to vote. That's what democracy feels like.
I love that. Thank you. Because of what this gentleman did in 2018 and others who joined him in places like Tarrant County, that had previously been the largest urban red county in the United States of America. Democrat had not won it since 1994. This is where Fort Worth is and where Arlington, Texas is. We won Tarrant County. We won the major 4 metro areas in the state of Texas and their surrounding counties. The first time a Democrat has done it since LBJ last did it in 1964. That is what knocking on doors, talking to voters, and turning them out does. Produces an historic voter turnout, and this time we win.
Thank you. So it sounds like you have such a great plan for schools and the trajectory there. But I have a question, so that all that good work doesn't go undone. You know, obviously I want to be as inclusive as possible. But even last night when we were at dinner, somebody offered us drugs. And so I'd like to just hear, how do you thread that needle of inclusivity, being welcoming, while also stopping some fentanyl? I don't know. I'd like to hear if you have thoughts on that.
I really appreciate the question. There's probably nothing more important than the safety and security of our communities, of our families, especially of our kids and our grandkids. We see under Abbott's failed leadership, violent crime going up, drug trafficking going up. When we're focused on pulling stunts and scoring political points, we take our eye off the ball in the real problem where it is. I'll give you some examples. Despite the pleading of sheriffs and police chiefs from across this state, Abbott turned his back on them and signed into law something known as permitless carry, which allows anyone to carry a loaded gun in public without a background check, without any training or vetting whatsoever. Now, we used to have something that you all are familiar with called license to carry. And if you wanted to carry a gun in public, we said, that's perfectly fine. Let's just make sure that you go through a background check so that we are able to determine whether you have a past as a violent criminal, whether you abuse the people in your lives. Let's make sure that you have some training, so you have some proficiency with that firearm and don't hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. Let's just make sure that we do our due diligence before we let you out on the streets. And by and large, that program worked. And for some in the rest of the country, this was the pride of the nation. This is how you do it right. But for some reason, and probably to score points with the NRA and the gun lobby and the corporations, Greg Abbott threw that all away, turned his back on those cops, signed permitless carry into law, and you now have Texas leading the nation in the number of cops and sheriff's deputies who have been gunned down. You have a predictable spike in gun violence, and you have a slide in the clearance rate for violent crime in the state of Texas. When Abbott took office, the clearance rate was 70%. Today, it is 50%. So here are some ideas on how we can stop violent crime. Here are some ideas on how we can stop drug trafficking in our communities. First, at the border, let's make sure that we lead as a state, not as Democrats and not as Republicans, enforcing a rewrite of our immigration laws so that we can address those who want to come here and work, return to their home country with the money that they've earned here legally and in an orderly fashion. Let's address the wait times if you want to get in the back of the line, which in some countries like Mexico and India and the Philippines means you wait 20 years to legally immigrate to the United States. We're providing a perverse incentive for people to cut that line and cross in between the ports of entry. Let's take that away as an excuse. Let's make sure that we clear up our asylum system. We're seeing historic levels of brutality and death on this continent in the northern triangle of Central America, to the point that people are willing to send their 12-year-old daughters, their 11-year-old sons on a 2,000-mile journey without their family to try to seek asylum and refuge in this country. As the parent of 3 kids, and you all are parents and grandparents as well, you would never do that unless you had to do that. And clearly these people feel like they have to do it. We could clear that asylum backlog by making sure that we have more asylum hearing officers at our ports of entry and at the border, that we end Title 42 so that we honor the asylum laws that are on the book and have rule of law where this country meets the rest of the world, and say clearly, if you want to come to this country, you must follow our laws. We have updated our laws to reflect our values and our needs and our priorities. That allows us to focus on the real challenges like human smuggling and the smuggling of fentanyl that you just mentioned into this country. And then the second thing, and this comes from listening to deputies and officers and members of law enforcement from around the state. They don't want to be intervening in a case of homelessness. Although right now we send the cops out to deal with somebody who's experiencing that sleeping on the sidewalk right now. We don't want sheriff's deputies intervening in a mental health care crisis that is non-violent, where the person's not a danger to themselves or anyone else in their family. We want to send somebody who is trained to deal with this, a therapist, a social worker, a clinician. We can do that. Again, not for lack of resources, for lack of political will. If we were to do that, we would free up those cops and sheriff's deputies to focus on violent crime, to clear that backlog. I mentioned it went from 70 to 50%, to do a better job of reducing murders and rapes. Remember when he signed the abortion ban and a reporter asked him, Governor, you understand there's no exception for incest or rape? And like a deer caught in the headlights, he said, well, we're going to eliminate rape in the state of Texas. Not only has he not eliminated rape in the state of Texas, it has gotten worse, at least in terms of the clearance of these violent crimes. So instead of pulling stunts or scoring political points, I've gone to members of law enforcement to ask them how we get this done. And that's what they tell us. They say, free us to focus on violent crimes, to deter them, to investigate them, to bring criminals to justice, closure and resolution for victims. When I'm governor, we're going to focus on that, and public safety is going to improve in the state of Texas. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Thank you. 4 years ago, I retired here when you were running for Senate, and I met your wife, Amy, and your sister down, and I thought, my God, there's Democrats in this, and I'm not the only one. My concern is now, you brought up the issue of transgender. It's close. I have a grandson, and when Abbott passed all that other crap, what happened is I'm worried at 17 years old, he wasn't going to be able to get his medication. He just turned 18, so he's okay. But there's so many others that aren't in a place. I need to know that as this state, we stop this disinformation of what transgender means. My son and daughter-in-law had to be counseled before they could get the medication. They didn't just walk in the door and go, oh, by the way, my child decided this. It's not true. We got to stop this disinformation, which I think starts with me and all of us, to get the correct information, and don't be afraid to share it. And what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for asking this. And thank you for asking the question in such personal terms. And this is your grandson. And I don't know if there's anything in your life that means more to you. And I can tell in the way that you ask this. You know, it really seems to me that the governor that we have right now is intent on using people as props. I don't know what he honestly thinks about transgender kids one way or another. I don't know what he thinks about immigrants one way or the other. I don't know what he thinks about critical race theory one way or the other, but these are all useful props to divide us, to scare us, to instill fear, to win an election by harming literally the most vulnerable among us. You know, Greg Abbott uses people as props to gain political power. I think the way that we see things is we want political power in order to be able to have the power to help people, like those transgender kids, who I will fight for every single day, not just defensively against those who would attack them, but to make sure that we demonstrate the pride that we feel about them, and that they know that this is a home that values them, and welcomes them, where they're going to live to their full potential, fulfill their full promise on this planet. We want them to do it right here in the state of Texas. And listen, this is another thing we don't like to hear about, and it's tough for me to talk about. But those transgender kids, even prior to this governor's attack on them, had some of the highest rates of suicide and suicidal ideation. Again, incredibly uncomfortable for us to say, but I'm confident that if we fail to confront it, we're never going to change it or improve it. Now, you tell me what it feels like to be 12 years old or 14 years old or 18 years old and to know the most powerful man in the state of Texas is coming after you. Feels like you are somehow fundamentally wrong and screwed up in your body. And he's going to come after your parents and literally take you from them by force if necessary and place you in a foster care system where kids are dying by the hundreds right now. That's what Greg Abbott is doing. That's the cost and consequence of keeping this guy in office. And you may or may not have a transgender child or a transgender grandson. You can only imagine what this person feels like and others whom I've met across my travels in Texas may feel like. But just think about what this logic extends to. It's anybody who's vulnerable in our communities, anybody who doesn't currently have political power or find themselves in the majority of a given situation. These are the people that he's vilifying and demonizing and trying to set the other people of Texas loose on right now. We have to remind our fellow Texans and the rest of the world for that matter, this is a big state. It is big enough for all of us. It's big enough for each one of our dreams and all the potential that we can allow to fulfill itself, to ensure that we can deliver on those dreams. And that means transgender kids. It means kids who are not transgender. It means all of us, right? And that used to be a basic common Texas value, at least in my 4 generations with our family in this state. That's what I think Texas used to stand for. So let's get back to it, right? Thank you for the question.
To your left.
There we go.
Hi there. First of all, my name is Sean Loring. I wanted to thank you for coming to our little slice of Texas.
Thank you, Sean.
Tethering on the remarks that you were making about law enforcement, when you win and take office, I'm curious as to what type of legislation you would support surrounding criminal justice reform, and also with particular attention to offices like district attorney, in which it seems like there's vested a tremendous and disproportionate amount of power.
It's interesting, I had a chance to speak to one of the chiefs of police of one of our larger cities in Texas recently. And I asked him the question that came up earlier, how do we do a better job on keeping one another safe? And he mentioned some of the things that I reiterated to you all about, when you have a mental health care crisis that's nonviolent, when you have a family dispute that's nonviolent, when you have someone experiencing homelessness and it is nonviolent, there might not be a need to send an officer to that situation. And in some cities, you have clinicians that actually either ride with officers or are independently dispatched to address these situations. It's a terrific way to give those officers their opportunity to focus on the real problems before them, violent crime, namely. We ask cops and sheriff's deputies to do way too much, to do really everything that none of us really want to deal with. And that's more than any woman or man should ever have to contend with. So that's a good start. But I think we must also pair this with what I think the spirit of your question is, which is a real accountability for those who hold the power of life and death over us. I have met too many of our fellow Texans who tell me that they are afraid of those who were sworn to protect and to serve them. They know of too many people who look just like them, who were stopped or detained at a regular traffic stop and ended up dead, who through a nonviolent confrontation ended up losing their lives. And they want to make sure that there is accountability. And I tell you, from listening to this police chief and from most of the officers and deputies that I've met along the way, they also want to make sure that there is accountability. Because when there is not, a couple of things happen. One, the reputation of that entire force becomes tarnished by association. And most of those cops and sheriff's deputies are good women and men doing the right thing, or as right as they can get to it each and every single time. But second, it breaks down trust and relationships in the communities, and people are less likely to step forward and say, you know what, I think there's somebody selling fentanyl out of the house next door. or I'm afraid that this person on my street is being beaten by their spouse, if you're afraid that your encounter with law enforcement, even serving as a witness to a crime, might lead to harm coming to you, then you're not going to step up, and we are then, by definition, less safe, and more criminals are able to roam free. So we want to make sure that we invest in those officers, that we free them up to do their job, that we make sure that there is no shortage of funding or training or support or respect for them, but that they are also held to the highest possible standard because they have one of the most important possible jobs that I can think of in our communities, and we want them to be successful. And only by doing those two things together can we ensure that they have that chance to be successful, and can we improve public safety in our communities. And I think working with locally elected DAs on this to make sure that we have reform whose number one goal is improving public safety, but that will follow along these lines and similar lines, I think that's a great place to add on to what I just described. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Okay, this is going to be our last question, but we are going to stay for a little bit afterwards. We're going to be in the back. They're in the back of the building. You can either go left or you can go right and go around. There's some shade back there, so we're going to stay, say hi, and take pictures if you'd like to hang out with us after.
Well, howdy, and I want to preface my question with, I am an extremely proud educator, and I love my job. I love my district. I am a fortunate one. I am very lucky to not be affected the way people I know and love. But my question is, how are you going to combat, or maybe I should say we, going to combat the mass exodus of teachers because of the extreme micromanaging from legislatures, admin, and the unfair state practice test, not just the practicing of doing the STAR or any, and then the apathy of students and teachers. How can we combat that?
First of all, thank you for your public service and your commitment to the profession and to those children in your school. You know, I think it's interesting that when you and other educators started to step up and speak out and talk about how many teachers were leaving the profession by the thousands through these 2 years of the pandemic, after the humiliation that the governor tried to visit on them. This is the version of history that you're allowed to teach. These are the parents that we expect you to turn in. These are the books that you have to pull out of your library. I mean, no educator that I've met got into this for the money or the fame or the glory. They're just trying to connect with those kids and draw forth a lifelong love of learning. We get that much done, and there's no stopping that kid over the course of their lives. That's all I've ever known any educator to do. But to be so grossly underpaid, to face a retirement where there will not be a cost of living adjustment on this trajectory for years or decades to come. The horrible insurance somebody just mentioned, I learned in 2017 of a teacher in Weatherford, Texas, who had insurance, but did not have the money in her bank account for the co-pay on flu medication and died of the flu just 5 years ago in the state of Texas. I hear from teacher after teacher and spouse after spouse of those teachers about how poor that insurance is and what a disservice, and that's also driving away these teachers. And so as we all were making noise about this, what does the governor do? He stands up a teacher task force that has almost no teachers on it. I don't know if you all saw this. And then when he caught hell for that, he belatedly brought some teachers around the table. Listen, I have been going out and intentionally seeking input from teachers all across this state. And it's pretty clear what we need. We outlined some of that earlier in terms of the increase in pay, the improvement in health insurance, the cost of living adjustment for retirees. There's some other ideas that I've heard from you that I really like and want to work with the legislature to implement, like the fact that right now you're asked to take tens of thousands of dollars in debt on in order to have the privilege of teaching our kids in the classroom. What if we canceled that debt for teachers in underserved school districts where their profession is in demand, or clear it out of the way before they even enter the profession so they don't have that burden to shoulder on top of everything else? But the word that I hear more often than not is respect. I hear teachers say, I'm a professional, and Beto, I want to be treated as the professional that I am. I know what I'm doing. I know what my job is. I don't need people from the outside with these high stakes, high pressure tests telling me how well my kids can perform or how dumb they are or whatever that's supposed to do, because it's not working for sure, especially after 2 years of COVID. I don't want to jump through all the hoops, fill out all this crazy paperwork to just do anything at all. I don't want to spend 3 months of the academic year training my kids for a standardized test. I want to be reading the full text of the books that I've assigned them. We're reading the abridged versions in so many of our Texas high schools right now. And when I ask those students and their teachers why, they say it's the standardized test. Because that is the one grade in Texas, uniquely across the country. That is the one grade we get that determines that school's letter grade, A through F, in the state of Texas. Your kid's performance on the STAR test. It's crazy. So I'm going to make sure that we respect you, that we listen to you, that we include you at the table. And mark my words, when we win, the next TEA commissioner will be a classroom teacher who knows what it's like to connect with those kids and get them in. Thank you for asking. Polk County, thank you so much for coming out. We're going to hang out for just a little bit. One last question for you all. Let me answer this question. Let me ask you all a favor or a question. The question is, what happens when your local officials, say your DA, this came up earlier, or your sheriff, or local law enforcement, don't share the point of view that we just described earlier? We've got to make sure that there is full accountability for everyone in law enforcement, for everyone in this country. We are a country governed by laws, not by men or by women. You know, más o menos, I'm paraphrasing where we started from in 1776 and after we wrote the Constitution. And that's what really distinguishes the United States of America from so much of the rest of the world. But when we treat some people as beneath the law and others above the law, we begin to lose what is special about this place, and we descend into something else altogether. As you know, in the state of Texas, we have the Rangers, who are supposed to investigate local cases of either corruption or malfeasance or abuse of power by public officials. I want to make sure that they do that when there are reasonable grounds for believing that someone is abusing their office or abusing their power over others. So I do want you to know that there are tools that we can use at the state level to address things at the local level. And I look for you to be my eyes and ears and to share that with me so we can be responsive to that. Last thing that I want to say, I mentioned I need you to block walk with us, and I really do, to knock on doors, to meet those voters. There's something else I need from, I hope, 2 or 3 of you here in this room. When those people, when all of you texted Texas to 20377, we're going to send you out to a block walk, or it's called a canvas, where you gather at a central location. Hi, Cynthia. Cynthia's taking a nap behind me back here. She was getting the water. All these volunteers who've signed up, they're going to need a place to go to meet, to receive their instructions, and to then sally forth and go meet the voters of Polk County. I'm looking for those who are willing to host a canvas or a block walk. You can host it on your front porch. You can host it in the park across the street from your house. You can host it right here. You can host it at a bar or a coffee shop or a restaurant. But what we'll ask you to do, and we'll train you on how to do this, we'll walk you through it, we'll hold your hand while it happens. All we're asking you to do is to be the hub for all of those who want to go out and knock on doors and to be a leader here. I'm just looking for 2 or 3 people to raise their hand and offer to do that. And I'm happy to make it as awkward as I need to until so we got 1 here. Give me just 1 more. I've got 1 more. I've got 2. Do I have a 3rd? I've got a 3rd and a 4th. Okay, that was better than we expected. Thank you all so much for being here. We'll hang out in the back. Look forward to having a chance to talk with you. And then Chantel in the back will sign you up for that host. Thank you.